Good afternoon.
嘿嘿，我得打字，你这么躺着可以的 ，OK， 我得干活。
Morning, everybody. Welcome to our next AI Education Working Group. I'm going to give people a few seconds or so here to join so we can reach some critical mass before heading down the road today. Let me queue up my working group presentation here. And I'll share that. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us again today. Just a brief note, Albert is not able to be here with us today. Never fear, we will proceed, and we have some really interesting stuff to walk through. I think Angela is joining us on the call to get the recording and the transcription moving and help us with any coalition-oriented needs we might have on today's session. Let me share really quickly and we will dive in. We have a packed agenda today. Let's see. Are you seeing the presentation?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for that confirmation. Let me get this meeting back on. And just, go ahead and throw your name in the chat if you're new today. It's great to see where people are, where they're coming from. Welcome if you are new. For those of you that aren't new and have been with us on this journey, thanks for coming back. And we are on our 10th meeting, so we have entered into the double digits. So thanks everybody for your input. As I said, we have a really interesting agenda today. We're going to touch really briefly on last meeting, what we talked about. Brad and Aza from the city of Austin are going to walk through some survey results on their AI survey. So we're really excited to see that and get some feedback from the group. I'm going to do a walkthrough of the current version of the fire and safety deck, just a high-level overview to get some feedback on the group before we make that live. We'll touch base really quickly on our other projects that are on the burner and talk about some changes as the coalition moves into phase 3. And then at the end, if there's time, we'll get into some of our ongoing action items. So just really briefly, at the last meeting, we really spent some time talking about, Jim was looking for some feedback on the final version of the Fire AI course and the accompanying video. So we didn't get a whole lot of feedback, so that's why we're going to do a little bit of a live walkthrough today to get some feedback from the group. We also have talked about working with the public sector network who's going to host that training, and I'm continuing to work with them on getting our page set up, and once we have that final version of the video, getting that hosted there on the page and distributing to the group how to access that moving forward. So more to come on that. And Meg did a great job introducing the public engagement survey. And, we talked a bit about brainstorming some of that content and ways to distribute that to get broader participation. And we'll get a chance, hopefully, for Meg to chime in on where she's at with that and if she needs any further support from the group. And with that, I want to make sure we give Brad and Asa some time here at the beginning. They're going to launch us through a presentation about that City of Austin AI survey. And then after that presentation, we'll open it up for some discussion and reflection on what the results might mean for our collective work here in this AI education working group. So, Brad, without further ado, I am going to stop my share and turn it over to you to launch us into your presentation.
Great, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and share the screen. I'd like to mention the PI on the project, Dr. Sharon Strover, is also here and will also be involved in our presentation today.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome, Sharon.
Sure. Thanks.
Okay. So again, can everybody see the slide?
Yes.
Great. So again, thanks for giving us a chance to share some of our results. As we discussed last week, or sorry, last month, at the previous meeting, the surveys have recently been completed. We are currently analyzing the data from the surveys. Next week, we will be starting our ethical AI workshops with city staff to get a sense of how well our approaches are working at this stage. And yeah, so we're hoping for feedback on both of those dimensions, and hopefully you'll find some of our findings interesting as well. So just to give some an overview of what we're going to talk about. First, Dr. Sharon Strover is going to be giving some background on the collaboration with the City of Austin, as well as on the survey effort that we did on looking at City of Austin staff attitudes and uses of AI. From there, Dr. Strover is going to look at present some of the demographics, attitudes, and AI uses that we saw in the survey data. I will take it over and go over some of the findings related to ethical awareness and perceptions of AI accuracy among our respondents, as well as express desire and need for ethical AI training. And then to wrap things up, Azza El-Masri will take over, present our plans for our ethical AI workshops and one of our use case scenarios that we would like to share with you all, and hopefully hear some ideas for other use cases that we could try out with our workshop participants. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Strover to give some background on the collaboration.
Sure, thanks. I know you have a packed agenda, so we'll try to move very quickly on this. I saw Meg Young is here. She is on our advisory committee, and our refers to good systems and a specific project looking at AI in city environments in particular. And this is a collaboration between UT Austin. This particular project is a collaboration between UT Austin and our project under Good Systems, this multidisciplinary, large, multi-year effort at the university. And we have an interlocal agreement with the City of Austin, which really facilitates a lot of transactions between the university and the city. It smoothes all of our arrangements. So it's been very helpful and has eased the undertaking of research. And I think everybody agrees it's working pretty well so far. If you want to go to the next slide, basically what we're going to do is share with you some of the background on the survey respondents. As perhaps Brad and Asa told you last week, we administered 2 surveys. One is to all employees of the City of Austin. We got about 1,500 completed surveys back. And then we have a smaller survey that is really targeting what we're calling it the advanced survey, that's targeting more data-centric users. So we got about 1,500 completed surveys, folks, and as you can see from this slide, they fall predominantly in this not middle-aged, but the ages from 35 to 54 or so. That's most of the workforce in the City of Austin. Then there's a smaller percentage that's older, smaller percentage that's a little bit younger. As the next slide shows, most of the respondents are actually full-time workers. A much smaller percentage is temporary employees, and an even smaller percentage are contractors. 58% of our respondents have no direct reports, and 15% of them identified as leads. Another 24 or so identified their roles as supervisor or manager or something like that. And then we had a very small percentage of directors as well. So that's the picture of the people who responded to the survey. And it's a pretty good representation, we think, of the folks in the city. So one thing that is, I don't believe we have a slide of this, is we looked at where they came from in the city, and we had pretty good representation from a variety of units. They came from Austin Energy, or we have a municipally owned utility, library, our City of Austin library, the fire department, transportation, water and public health. The numbers of respondents were all fairly high there. I was especially interested in whether or not the police would be represented in the sample, and they had a pretty small response rate there. Do you want to go to the next? Yeah, so we were interested in getting people's general sense of attitudes toward both technology and then AI in particular. And we asked them some fairly pointed questions about their beliefs about AI. First, in terms of their attitudes about the overall impact of technology, most people were fairly positive or neutral about the overall impact of technology on society. When we began to break this down by age and by position, we did find that there are, and I don't know if this is on the next slide, Brad, or not, but you can move to the next slide in any case. We found that the majority of workers, as the last slide showed, were positive about the impacts of AI, but when we looked at positions or age, there were some differences. We found, for example, that older people, there were differences by age and by position, with people in higher level positions being slightly more positive. And this is captured in some of their concerns about impacts of AI as well. We asked people a series of different technologies to gauge how familiar they were with different technologies. Most of them were familiar with these three, as you can see here. The highest familiarity was with chatbots and virtual assistants. There was a fair amount of familiarity with text analysis, a little lower familiarity with AI-powered collaboration tools. There was no relationship with being familiar with these tools and position, but there was an inverse relationship between familiarity and age. Younger people were more familiar with these tools than older people were. That is probably pretty predictable, we feel. When we look at the next item, which has to do with effects on job, or how they use AI, or how they feel AI might be important to their work, a lot of people said that right now AI is not particularly important to their work. You can see in the lower levels, they're not at all important or slightly important. That's about 60% of the sample are saying it's not that important. Then there is a slice, 27%, that's saying it's moderately important. Then much smaller percentages that say it's very important. However, when we ask them the next question on the next slide about how likely they are to use technologies, it shifts a little bit more, and people clearly anticipate using AI technologies at work. So there, people believe that it's coming, basically. So So it's important. Few people say it's now said it was extremely important to their work, but it's not the same as saying how likely they are to use it at work. And in this sample, higher position levels reported that AI was more important to their work than did people at lower levels. And when we did some statistical tests on this, and there were significant chi-squares when we investigated positions and age in particular, and what the relationships were to these ideas about AI technologies at work. And then on the next slide, we asked what people were specifically using AI for right now. And the most uses obviously were for communicating or reporting. People in city staff positions do have to write a lot of reports. A much smaller percentage, about a third of the sample, were using it for some content creation and for data analysis in particular. This graph includes multiple responses because we gave people a bunch of choices and they could choose whichever ones applied to them. But you can see the top three were the types of AI or the AI applications that were the most heavily used at this point. So this kind of set the stage for how people then were going to respond to some of the ethical issues that we raised. And Brad is going to talk about that. I did want to put one little note in there because I wasn't sure if Brad was going to talk about it. We had some open-ended questions that, frankly, in survey environments, I'm used to not getting much response to open-ended questions. If people will complete these closed-ended questions, it's great. You've got it. And very few people will volunteer more open-ended responses. We got solid responses to the open-endeds, typically 200 or 300. Actually wrote some things in our open-endeds, and they weren't exactly what we anticipated, which tells me if I were to do this again, I would definitely have some somewhat different questions. And maybe Brad will get into this. There were some surprising things that people volunteered about their affect, their emotion, and AI in this. So I'm going to turn it over to Brad.
Thanks, Dr. Schover. Yeah, we got hundreds of responses, and in many cases, paragraphs. People felt very strongly about why AI maybe shouldn't be used, but I'll get to that in a moment. On the last slide, we were talking a bit about the use of AI data analysis. And so as Dr. Schover just discussed, that does raise ethical issues depending on, of course, the way AI is used and what data it is used on, right? Such use is also in tension with respondents' views on the accuracy of AI and their ethical awareness, which is what I'm getting into here. So here on this slide, you can see only 10% of respondents agreed, I am comfortable with AI making decisions about that affect my work, which is pretty interesting, right? When there seem to be a lot of people who believe they're likely to use it. And nearly half, 48%, responded neutral when asked if AI generated content is true. So what we have here is a lot of people planning to start using it. However, they're very uncertain about whether or not the information can be, reliable or trusted, right? Whether or not it's actually true. Similarly, awareness of algorithmic bias impacting accuracy was also widespread. There was less than 7% of respondents who disagreed, either strongly or just disagree, about the existence of AI-powered technologies being biased towards the experiences of certain populations. So that's very interesting to see that there seems to be consensus on this point of algorithmic bias being an issue. Regarding ethical awareness, only 3.5% of respondents do not believe that AI may impact data privacy, as you see here on this slide. Separately, we asked whether AI could make mistakes that affect safety. And while that's not here on the slide, it was very similar. Only 2.8% of respondents disagreed to that one. So very similar. There seems to be a lot of consensus around the ethical issues that we are trying to educate people on. The greatest consensus that we saw was around the need for AI transparency, with only 1.2% disagreeing with the idea that AI should be transparent in how it makes decisions. So just really strong support for the need for transparency as AI gets used and deployed in city contexts. So connecting these insights to the topic of training, and the likelihood of using AI technologies, as Dr. Strover already described, there is a need for training so that city workers can align their values with their actions on the job. So, for example, we had more than 80% of respondents agreeing that training is at least moderately important to improve their understanding and use of AI technologies at work, which is what you see here on this slide. Crucially, the most popular topic desired for AI training was how AI impacts my specific job tasks. So this stresses the need for training to occur within specific departments, or at the very least alongside peers. I know that on the GovAI approach, if you use the materials, it very much does start with finding people to be point persons. And so it's great to see that kind of meshing well. So as we've already been talking about a little bit, written responses to the other, especially for the question on this slide, of which there were many, more than 200, as you can see, were pretty notable. We do still need more time to go through and assess them because, written responses take more time to analyze. But what we can say is that many people specifically asked for ethics training, if not clarification on the city policies. And as I've alluded to already a bit, I think they took it as a chance to entirely oppose the use of AI on ethical grounds. At least some people did. So it's interesting to see it be, again, most people did not reply to other, but there was a substantial amount of people who took the time to sort of oppose it. And so that's an interesting finding. And I wonder if there's similar pushback at other cities or within other governments among employees about whether or not AI should be used in the first place. Finally, on a separate question not pictured here, only 31.6% of respondents expressed a willingness to commit to more than 4 hours of AI training online. So we specified online, so maybe that could be explaining a bit of that. But thinking about things, limited to a 4-hour roughly commitment and bringing all these findings together, we can say that perhaps training content needs to be context specific and brief, clarifying for city employees what uses of AI are transparent, safe, mitigate bias, and protect privacy as they go about their specific job tasks. So this requires, of course, clear guidance and training on how said guidance applies within specific department activities. And as I already mentioned, ideally, this would involve finding point people within different departments and organizations that compose a city. And yeah, I think as many in the audience probably might already be thinking, I find it great that our survey seems to be lending empirical support to what GovAI is already advocating for in terms of the existing approaches and resources being provided through the coalition. So I think that's reassuring that we're all on the right path. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Aza, who will briefly go through our plans for the workshops that start next week.
Thanks, Brad. I'll talk briefly about how we've approached our trainings. I'm going to speak a little bit about the framework for ethical AI literacy that we're developing and present a practical use case that we intend to apply with our participants, and we'd love your feedback on it. In our training and based on the survey findings that Brad and Dr. Strover just presented, we saw a need to push for what we now call an ethics-first approach to AI literacy for city employees. Especially, in the public sphere or like in the public sector, the use of technology comes with very high stakes. There's always a balance to strike between responsible innovation and maintaining public trust. So practically speaking, it's important to approach AI use and training from a strong ethical foundation as its adoption becomes more commonplace in the city. We've identified 4 key pillars that form part of this foundation. First, what we term values before tools. So what that means is identifying the core values or principles animating an agency or a department's work and selecting tools that align with them. So one other way to think about this is, are you choosing this AI tool because it serves your mission or merely for convenience or novelty? A second pillar is critical questioning. Through critical questioning, we reframe our relationship to AI as one that is always negotiable. So you could so that moves you from or that encourages a habit of asking should we instead of can we. Third, contextual understanding allows us to recognize that none of the AI tools will be tailored to community-specific contexts. And this is an even more important pillar as cities and agencies begin to develop their own AI assistants and chatbots for public and internal use. So contextual understanding allow you to ask this specific question: how can we strike a balance between city guidance, stakeholder needs, and tool implementation? And then finally, a responsibility focus should permeate this entire ethical foundation. This means establishing clear accountability and oversight mechanisms at every step of the way. Next slide, please. With this framework in mind, we've identified, not just with this framework, but because of the findings in the survey, we've identified 7 specific ethical considerations and questions that should guide AI use. First, accountability. How do we establish clear lines of responsibility when using AI tools, but also when picking or procuring AI tools? Second, privacy. What personal or sensitive data is being used or generated when using this AI tool? Third, safety. What safeguards are in place to prevent AI from providing dangerous information or instructions? And so that needs at every step of the way, there needs to be a human in the loop. Fourth, transparency. How can we clearly communicate to stakeholders when and how AI is being used? Fifth, we make the distinction between bias and hallucination and societal impacts. Bias and hallucinations have to do with how can we mitigate existing societal biases reflected or amplified in the AI systems. And societal impacts considers the long-term societal implications of normalizing AI for a specific function in the city. So think about inequity, think about employment diversification, think about different issues that you see in your communities. And then finally, environmental harms. How do we balance efficiency gains against environmental costs? Today, more than before, especially in a lot of states in the United States, we are reckoning with a lot of environmental issues, and it is not AI wastes a lot of energy and wastes a lot of resources. And so we need to bake in an environmental awareness within our ethical considerations for AI literacy. This iterative practice of questioning should obviously not only be applicable to AI training, but also to AI development and implementation. Next slide, please. We've set out to develop scenarios that we could apply during our trainings with beginner and intermediate users on best practices for using tools like ChatGPT, for example. We developed these use cases based on what we saw in the surveys, as well as the many great examples the GovAI working group produced, and so we're very grateful for those. We also made sure that these use cases followed the city's AI policy. And then ultimately, our goal in all of this is, with these scenarios, is not just to learn how to use AI, but actually to promote an ethical sensitivity in staff's day-to-day use. And so I'm going to show you now an example of a use case that we will be applying in our workshop starting next week. Next slide, please. So here's an example about using AI for translation for public health programming or for public health communication. The background, we provide a background for, and all of this is happening within groups, right? We're going to divide folks within groups. In a breakout group, they will be given 30 minutes to deal with not only try the tool, but also go through these ethical considerations. And so we looked at Austin Public Health and saw that they have regularly translated some of their communications to other languages, including Spanish, Arabic, and Burmese. I'm an Arabic speaker, and I've noticed that sometimes these translations aren't exactly accurate or may be grammatically incorrect because of a reliance on tools like Google Translate. With this breakout group, we ask our participants to not only test ChatGPT for translation, but also have them work through these 4 or 5 key ethical questions together to come up with sort of a guidance of how to think about using AI for a process like translation, which is important and needed when you have to talk to different parts of your community. I know the challenge is you need to use AI for efficiency, but at the same time, when you keep thinking about these things, it becomes it becomes preventative to how you implement AI correctly. It might, lead you to develop specific lexicons that would be used by your agency for these specific needs and these specific demographics. You could, test different tools and see which one works best. You could bring in community stakeholders who could review these translations before they go out. And so these allow people or users and staff to think a bit creatively about AI in a way that brings back their agency in the process. And I think this is where we'd love your feedback, and we'd love to get your questions. Thank you.
If I could hop on the Az's point about environmental considerations, this is something that came up in our open-ended responses. We're located in Texas. We don't have much water. And our electricity in this town, it comes from the city itself. We have several large municipal utilities in the state. So the issue of energy it's prominent. People understand it.
And it does seem to be incorporated now, or is in the process of being incorporated into the GovAI resources and recommendations as well. So it really, again, everything is coming together beautifully between what we're doing and what GovAI is doing, I think.
Absolutely, I think so too. And Brad, Sharon, and Azza, thank you so much for bringing this information to us and sharing it with us. I think it's going to be super critical for our work here in this working group for sure. And I've seen some comments in the chat about whether this information is accessible or will be shared around to the group. And is that something that we can do, or is this?
We can definitely share the survey. We can share, we can make something pretty that includes the basic frequencies. Right now it's a lot of computer output. And we can make this presentation available if that's helpful.
Yeah. That would be great.
Our final report to the city will be coming in the several months from now, and then that would be probably the best, most definitive thing. But before then, making the slides available is totally fine, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And I do want to make a note, facilitator, on the schedule. I think I'm going to make the executive decision to push our walkthrough of the Fire and AI deck back to the next meeting, so that we can get into some Q&A here, because I saw a lot of comments in the chat, and I'm really interested in hearing about, people's reactions to this data. But I will mention that the deck that Jim has put together, the first sort of introductory deck for AI in the fire service, really does touch on a lot of these elements. It's like it's almost mirroring what you presented today in terms of presenting an ethical framework, talking about the accuracy, helping people understand how this can be a useful tool, but also the guardrails that are necessary. And the other thing I would just mention is I was just having a conversation with my team here at RGS, the training team, about embedding AI into some of our content. We were just talking about needing this consistent and coherent approach to AI. Like, before you jump in and start using these tools, here's some things to think about. And that slide you showed about the ethical framework was just like exactly in my mind what I was hoping I had. So really
Mm,
appreciate that. But I want to
mm,
open it
mm.
up to the rest of the group and get people's questions. If you want to raise your hand and unmute and ask any questions you have or give any reflections you have about that, I'd love to hear from the group.
Hi, Rick. Rich, I mean.
Yes.
Sorry, I could not find the raise my hand button yet. But this is Lan Johnson,
Yep.
Cybertrust America. One quick point is about the comment that Rick posted in the chat window, which is about training, a bit more in-depth training. And in my mind, I was thinking about use cases. Because AI is a bit different from traditional software, where it just does a set of things, functionalities, and people just learn to use those functionalities then as a tool. But AI, in its way, is that it allows people to use creatively. Oh, I'm not saying the word right, but so that it's a more like the much more extensive than the basic tools that we're used to in the past. I guess is my point. Say people can use AI to solve a problem, and it can help them brainstorm on solutions to solve a problem. So much more extended use out of AI. And I think that might be what Rick and Andrew in the conversation is talking about. Also, this notion came from the set of training materials that this education committee shared before out of another nonprofit group, saying that the AI training materials will bring the most impact to the frontline workers when they think of creative ways to use it. So, in light of that, I wanted to lend support to what Rick is saying about a AI upskilling working group in combination with also people to enable use case development. So, just a long story short, echoing what Rick is saying, and very much looking forward to starting a working group towards that effect as a second phase of the basic AI training.
Great. Thanks for that, Lon. And I will mention in the AI education folder, there is some information on upskilling. And I know that Albert, he's not here today, but I know Albert led an upskilling effort at the city of San Jose and had some data showing the effectiveness of that and how much more time and much more accuracy was achieved through an upskilling effort to train people versus those people that hadn't gone through the upskill training. Like I think it was like 14 minutes per day was saved by those that weren't upskilled, and an hour was saved by those on a daily basis that were upskilled, which when you aggregate that is quite significant, I think. So really interesting point there. Andrew, I see your hand raised.
Thank you, Rich. I have a question in regards to the ethics first approach. There's so many ways in terms of, defining an approach for AI literacy. How did you end up and sort of decide there was going to be an ethics first? Can you share more about the thinking that led to that?
I can start. Part of our part of our approach was to do an extensive literature review on training in AI. There is a lot of training out there. And we have no intention of duplicating what, say, LinkedIn Learning does and so forth. There are a lot of efforts that can do that perfectly well. What we, however, did not find, and what is pertinent to the broader approach of good systems at UT Austin, is the ethics and the ethics questions that these tools raise. So kind of both from looking at the literature and seeing a gap, as well as bringing into the literature and our analyses more broadly an awareness that ethics was crucially important here. That's what brought us to an ethical lens to this effort. Yeah.
There's also the issue in the academic literature of this is more the study I'm referring to was looking more at higher ed education, but oftentimes ethics gets split, right, as somebody else's job instead of it being baked into the training on tools or the training on data work. It gets baked in to people perceive it as, okay, well, there's going to be an ethics person gets hired on. I will just do my stuff and not think about ethics. There will be somebody external to me who then kind of checks to make sure I'm doing everything right, and that just kind of doesn't really work very well. And so trying to bring those together, I think, is something that is also
to really bake it in. That's to Brad's point. Yeah.
Yep.
I really appreciate that, it's really culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I really appreciate this approach. The follow-up question here was in regards to critical questioning. I do wonder if sense making would also be kind of in that section, or do you think that should be somewhere else? And sense making from the perspective of common sense is not common, and unless we create a mental model of some sort to help understand, help people understand, the approach and then also where we're coming from, because ultimately everybody has different, education, academic background, learning, lived experiences, expertise, etc. So I'm curious about that part too.
I can jump in on that. Definitely. I think, sense making can go between critical questioning and contextual understanding, because you need a multi-stakeholder approach anyway in order to make sense of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. At the end of the day, this ethical foundation pushes people to not take things for granted, not take tools for granted, not take what's available to us for granted, but push for something better. And so in order to do that, we need to make sense of what's available to us and also the mechanisms behind those tools, right? Because, and so that's the whole idea. Does that answer your question?
I will just add.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I'll just add really quickly that, again, in the academic literature, this notion, and Azza mentioned the key term of a multi-stakeholder approach, but in many ways, what ultimately is ethical is something that is come at through a kind of consensus forming deliberative process. And if you don't involve all of the related people that are impacted by a technology, then you're not going to be able to arrive at that. And so the multi-stakeholder approach is very key to that.
Yeah, more broadly speaking, the point of departure for our project has been that with these new technologies, there's kind of an absence of norms. We're grappling with them, they're new, so we don't really have a felt or learned sense of what's appropriate in a lot of the forms. So we need to create that. And the way to you can't just create it by edict. It has to be something that the community creates and buys into that makes sense to people.
Thank you so much for the extended version of that. I really appreciate it.
All right. Jill, do you have your hand raised?
Yeah, hi, thank you. And I'm sorry, this is my first meeting here to this. So if this has already been heard extensively, just tell me where to look and I'll go find it. But I I really like this approach. This is something that we're really, looking at here at the Association of Washington Cities, especially not just internally, but how we can help our cities with their AI approaches as well. And one thing that I just was wondering about, and what kind of conversations have been had on this, is when it comes to the responsibility focus, and just thinking about as organizations start to, whether they leverage current AI or GPTs or build them in-house, we know if you build it in-house, like, bad data in is bad data out. And so when we talk about, like, what does your environment look like? What is, are you going to be pulling data that is good or true at one time, but is no longer relevant? So, having conversations about, with your legal or record staff about what kind of things should be pulled into, parameters when building a GPT for external or for internal users, or even for external users to use on your website to find information. And so kind of that cleanup approach, but then also when you're upskilling and teaching staff how to use AI and prompt, we talk about the energy and just the power that AI takes, and you can waste a lot with just bad prompts. And so, teaching people to prompt things in the right way, and the like when it's appropriate to do so, and so I think that and we know that right now AI is in its like generative form is pretty novel, but I also think, a lot of these, ChatGPT, Copilot, like, right now it's relatively affordable, because, I think just like with any business model, it's like we want to hook people in and make them dependent on it. And then, we kind of see the future of AI being a cost model where however much you're using, that's how much you'll pay for it. And so I think that that's part of like the future that we need to like be thinking about. And I mean, one of the examples that I've heard used is, if we put, a novel, a 1,500-page novel and load it into ChatGPT, but then only ask for a two-paragraph summary of that novel, is that a good, responsible use of AI? Like, probably not. And so where do you draw, like, how do you teach staff or users to work responsibly with these kind of tools, understanding how much energy and power it takes? I'm just kind of throwing that out there.
Also stress the key term human in the loop, right? And another key term would just be, using it as a means of augmenting your labor. Never trying to use those vast resources to replace that labor, but when you're using it to augment your labor, whether that's, maybe trying to find the right formula for an Excel, formula, that's probably not as energy and resource intensive as trying to summarize a novel, right?
Right.
And so I think there are ethical ways in terms of thinking of value for cost, right, that can be thought about.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks so much, Jill. I appreciate you joining us today and sharing your thoughts with us. Sure. Patrick, do you want to go next? I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just wondering, from a general perspective, kind of sprinkled in many of the survey questions, but it didn't come out directly to ask from the respondents from an AI, machine learning, deep learning perspective, in the context that their understanding is known that in the future, agentic AI, because of automation and because of decision-making logic, the way the agent was trained will make automated decisions on someone's behalf. So I was wondering, and looking at it from a municipal government perspective, and the understanding that in public safety, we have police, fire, and EMT. And I did understand that the police did not have an extensive survey response. However, looking at EMT on that medical side in healthcare, I'm wondering if the respondents understood where we are today and where AI, deep learning, and machine learning is going to be tomorrow. And in the context of privacy, security, and risk, was that kind of picked up as being understood from an individual public citizen perspective?
I don't think this survey can really speak to that. I think we'll have a better idea after we do the workshops, although the workshops will be with smaller groups necessarily. Agentic AI is what everybody is talking about now. And to the extent that it adds more layers of invisibility, I think it'll be a problem. And that's perhaps where the utility of very precisely specified use cases might be even more important. But you raised good points.
Great, thank you. And I want to do a time check here for us. We're down to the last 10 minutes of the class, and um, this has been such great information, and I'm wondering if this team might come back in a later meeting and continue discussing some of the things that have come up. I know we're absorbing a lot of data here, and you can see everybody's abuzz about different applications and ways this might apply to not just our working group, but to their own implementation around AI. And if you'd be willing to come back at another session to sort of continue the conversation.
Sure. We keep learning, and we haven't analyzed the other survey, which is the so-called advanced users, the data-centric users. The size of that sample is smaller, but I'm sure there's some very interesting things there. Yeah.
Great. And for those of you that have your hands raised, if you can maybe put your questions in the chat, and they can hopefully answer some of those questions, or we can save those until the next discussion that we have. I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to get to everything today, but this information was so valuable, and I'm already, my mind is spinning about ways that we can start applying this. I love the idea of the upskilling that was mentioned and some of the things we might want to think about in terms of the education we're providing to people. So I really appreciate your time today and sharing this really great information for us.
You're welcome.
And I know 1,500 people qualitative data is great to have, but also hard to work through. So thanks for compiling all of that for us and sharing those results. So,
well, most of it was quantitative data. The qualitative we're still working through. So
yeah. That's the great stuff, right? The meaty stuff. So thanks so much for coming today. And I am going to get us back into our presentation. We have a few things we want to follow up with at the end of this deck. If I can get it back on my screen in the right place. So the first thing I wanted to make sure we touched base about was the public engagement training. We did some discussion about this last week. Is everybody seeing the presentation?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Meg, do you have anything you want to prompt the group on or need from the group around this survey?
This is just a short call to action. First, I wanted to out loud congratulate the UT Austin team on their survey and excited to connect with you more. And to say that you can think about what they're doing as really robust user research to understand what do city employees already know, what do they need, and when they go back in and provide a citywide training, it's very, well shaped. And we're trying to achieve that same thing with the survey link that I just posted in the chat. But so far, we've had fewer than 30 people who've gotten a chance to fill this out. So my request for the team is, if you don't mind, if you please kindly share this link in your internal organization channel or on your social media feed, whether we reach other public workers or just members of the general public, friends and family, it would help our project so much to make sure that it produces materials that really respond to what people's needs are. That's it from me, Rich. Thanks, team. And I also wanted to just shout out my colleague, Emnet Tefesse, who will be joining this work and helping lead it. She did resident-facing AI 101 education in Brooklyn Public Library and beyond. So welcome, Emnet.
Great, thank you. And Meg will make sure to share that survey link in the meeting notes that go out after the meeting. And I noticed there was a question in email that if agencies are helping spread the word around this data collection, will they also get a chance to get the reporting and the survey results from that?
Absolutely. Yes. Open data. This is our data, and you can
Great.
use it for your own purposes. So thanks for your help in deploying it, and you'll absolutely have access to what we find directly in CSV.
Great. Thank you so much. And just a quick touch on some of our other things that are brewing around the AI insurance and risk management world. I gave a brief presentation to the PERMA board about general AI, about the resources of the coalition, and I think that went really well. Nicole, you're on the call. We had a follow-up meeting with Nicole and Tom from Prism about a potential new course about having conversations with insurance providers around AI and insurance coverage, which I think is going to be a really big area as we get into, the things that we're talking about, the ethical impacts of AI and how some of our good intentions might not always result in the best results. So, Nicole, you're on the call. Do you want to add anything based on our follow-up from that meeting?
Only just a clarifying comment. I think right now we want to take the approach of packaging and preparing everything, but not necessarily like pushing that out just yet. I think kind of the term is maybe don't quite prod the conversations to occur with insurance just yet, but to be on the ready for when those conversations should take place.
Yeah, and as Nicole said, we are still just sort of wrapping our heads around sort of an idea of an approach around this content and doing some exploration. Her and Tom are looking into some things, and then we're going to continue that conversation. So more news on that as it goes. Albert and I are meeting with a coalition of 30 chief information security officers next week. He's going to be delivering some AI cybersecurity content to that group, and then I'll be leading them through a Miro brainstorming exercise similar to what we did at the formation of this working group, and brainstorming on a training course broadly for CISOs in agencies. So we'll have more information about that. We're kicking that meeting off next Friday. And then we're still looking for content and experts and partners on the AI for HR professionals course. So if you know anybody that's interested in that, please send them our way to Albert and I. If you know people that are in HR that are sort of exploring AI and seem to have a better handle on it than others, we'd love to hear about those resources. So wanted to talk about some phase 3 changes that are coming up that are going to impact our group. As you can see, we have a lot of projects going, a lot of information, a lot of different trainings we're envisioning. And so we're going to start shifting our meeting cadence. We're going to start meeting on a bi-monthly basis. We have a lot of things going on and we need feedback from this larger group, this brain trust that we have here. And we need to sort of be getting that more frequently than monthly. So we're also going to be shifting the day and time of these meetings on an ongoing basis. They're going to be on Wednesdays, on the first and third Wednesdays monthly, starting in April. So our next meeting will be on, let me look at my calendar really quickly, April 2nd. And we will be getting out new calendar invitations for those because we're moving into phase 3 of the coalition. And it'll be from 12 to 1. So I hope you can join us at those ongoing meetings regularly as we increase the frequency. But I think it's really going to be critical as we move forward on all of these different initiatives that we have through this. Also, we're going to be revisiting, hopefully in the next meeting or two, the roadmap that we have for potential training products and sort of, coalescing some team support around some of those content items. So also wanted to mention that Sahar Noor is joining us. She has been leading our policy working group at the coalition. That format is shifting. She's shifting that from monthly meetings to office hours and sort of individual meetings with specific agency representatives to talk about policy implementation and usage of the policy materials and guidance that we have. She's going to be joining us in these working groups. We've already been thinking about potentially a policy implementation guidance deck and AI education guidance deck that we might be building out some more to come on that, but she will be participating with us here in these meetings going forward. So those are the sort of the big notes as that coalition is moving into phase 3 for this working group. And last but not least, our ongoing action items. You know, if you have any training materials you built out, please share them along. There's been several people that use the tools that are in the AI education folder. And as I mentioned in the chat today, there is some content on upskilling. There's some cybersecurity content there that the city of San Jose has put together and made accessible, and some other decks that are really helpful about implementing AI at an agency. So, if you've developed training materials, we'd love to have them in that folder also, because it becomes a more useful resource to see what different people are doing. But you can also, if you're like at a loss of how to get started on having these conversations, those are some good starting point decks and information for you that are accessible in that folder. Also, we have the AI education landscape that Dr. Giselle Waters from AI Procurement Labs helped us build out. That's an ongoing list of general AI training courses specifically geared towards public sector workers. There's a mix of free and paid courses on there. So, we keep that updated. If you have trainings that you've attended that you think the coalition would benefit, please keep adding them to that AI education landscape. And there's also a comments field on there that you can write any comments on any courses you've taken and give some evaluative feedback on those courses. So we hope that list and resource will continue to grow as well. And just a last reminder to share any project ideas with me and Albert. If you think, oh, we should be doing this as a training topic for our coalition members, please send that my way and we will work out and coordinate that. So we are right at time. I'm sorry we had to cut off conversation earlier, but thank you so much, everybody, for attending, for all the great engagement in the chat and the questions. And again, Sharon, Brad, and Azza, thank you so much for your time today and really bringing us this valuable data. And
you're welcome.
More information will be coming soon. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Goodbye.
Bye.